This story is important, I promise. In 2003, I fly to Atlanta, Georgia to watch the Falcons play the Steelers with my dad and his two brothers. It's Michael Vick's freshman year playing quarterback, and the crowd is bubbling with anticipation. And the game starts out great. The Falcons score a field goal in the first 3 minutes, and the crowd goes bonkers. But then someone calls a timeout, and I watch both coaches wave their players off the field, and a guy walk on with the American flag. Over the PA, a voice says, "Folks, the United States is now officially at war with Iraq." And man, the crowd erupts. I remember it like yesterday. It was like Caesar got assassinated. There was hooting and hollering. My uncles were cheering, but my dad was silent. When the players get back on the field, the rest of the game goes terribly. Vick throws 3 interceptions, and the Steelers end up finishing at 54-3. Shouldn't have even played the second half of the game. It was a waste of everybody's time. It was brutal, and the crowd knew it. The crowd were booing at the end. They knew it had been brutal. They knew their time had been wasted. Later that night, at home, I hear my dad talking to my mom in an irritated voice, and he says, "This is a mistake. There's going to be a civil war. It's never going to end." And I wonder why he thinks civil war when all the people on TV say it's a lightning war, 6 to 8 weeks, in and out. And the Iraqis are calling us liberators. What information is he able to synthesize to arrive at a conclusion different than all the important people I see on TV? It doesn't make sense to me. Spoiler alert, the Iraq War turns into a civil war. In fact, the Iraq War was kind of the seminal moment in my life. Likely was yours too. Can't separate my childhood from the Iraq War. I grew up, and each year I'd learn new phrases like mission accomplished, green zone, Abu Ghraib, Guantanamo Bay, Blackwater. I learned the government lies to us. I learned the news lies to us. I learned Christopher Hitchens and smart people get seduced into supporting opinions that are popular with their audience, but are ultimately wrong. And I learned I don't like war. Which leads us all the way to today with the Russian-Ukraine war. Government's lying to us, the news is lying to us, and smart pundits like Sager and Crystal Ball are Breaking Points and shifty-eyed Tucker Carlson are supporting positions that are popular with their audience, this time isolationism, but are ultimately wrong. Like when I perambulate around the internet, I feel like the political pundit class learned the wrong lessons from the Middle East wars in my childhood. Because the answer I hear now is the U.S. has no business involving itself in foreign affairs. All foreign affairs, and this includes Ukraine. Rather than the Iraq War was an unmitigated disaster, but each conflict is a snowflake carefully examined. Instead, it's we're wasting money in Ukraine. Ukraine is corrupt. Why should we help them? We need to get out of Ukraine. And they may have a point. Let's see. The U.S. is atrocious at prosecuting abstract wars. The war on terrorism, the war against communism, the war against drugs. We lose these the moment we start them. But there was a time the U.S. successfully prosecuted a just war, a concrete war. In 1991, Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait for her oil fields, and the U.S. coalition struck back in very clear terms. And we did not fight for democracy. Kuwait is as corrupt as Ukraine, but we did for one simple reason: to enforce international order, to enforce the rule that one country cannot invade another sovereign country and annex her resources. Kuwait isn't a democracy, but it wasn't about democracy. It was about enforcing international order. And the U.S., with a very clear goal to push Saddam out of Kuwait, pushed Iraq out of Kuwait. And the world applauded us for it, or golf clapped us for it. And to me, Russia's invasion of Ukraine resembles Kuwait much more than Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Libya. Ukraine is Kuwait. And since at the start of the invasion, the U.S. sanctioned Russia back to the 1950s and has been sending aid and money from the beginning, rather than pull away, we should escalate the war now. We should turn up the heat and cook the outcome to arrive quicker. In some ways, it's escalate to de-escalate. But let me be clear, we should escalate the war. And we should escalate the war for the reasons you may not think. Because the first escalation is a move nobody is mentioning. We should be allowing able-minded Russians to come to the United States like it's 1888. like Ellis Island is back open for business, baby. We're packing Russians into 747s and bringing them in like it's the evacuation of Afghanistan. Because between the start of Russia's invasion of Ukraine and her partial mobilization, over 900,000 Russians have fled the country. That's nearly 1 million Russians who have the economic resources to leave the country, a mindset to side with the West, and want to live in the United States, who are sitting in fucking Istanbul because they have nowhere else to go. Because here we have a situation where all the cost and labor of raising productive humans in society and giving them skills has been outsourced to Russia. We didn't have to spend any time or money raising these people, educating these people, giving them skills. Russia did all that, and now they want to leave Russia. We should be rolling out the red carpet for these Russians. This is an easy win for America. While simultaneously brain draining Russia of their skilled labor force, which the country desperately needs, America gets to reap all the benefit of their ingenuity around software, film, books, business. These are not bums, they're debatable asylum seekers. This is an army of Western educated, highly skilled, working age Russians that are currently sitting in Georgia and Serbia. What the fuck are they doing there? They should be coming to the United States, and we should be making it as easy as possible for them to do so. As you watch this video, there is a successful English-speaking Russian YouTuber who is currently sitting in Fallacy, Georgia, because our work visa policy is so stupid he has nowhere else to go, when he could be in California, paying taxes, contributing to our Social Security, starting a family, contributing to the community, translating Russian propaganda for us. That's one guy. There's 1 million of these educated industrial Russians living outside the country that they cannot return to and would love to come to the West. The only reason it's not being implemented is because of our brain-dead politicians and pundits who cannot imagine a single creative way to handle this war. The USA issues only 140,000 work visas annually, and no more than 7% can come from one specific country, which is the dumbest arbitrary number I've heard. I learned in 2022, over 20,000 Russians flew from Moscow and St. Petersburg all the way to Mexico City, rented an Avis car in Mexico City, and drove up to the US border, got out of their car, and then filled out asylum paperwork just to get into the United States. Meanwhile, the State Department processed 77 work immigration visas in Moscow. 77 visas. What the fuck are we doing? If Russians can fly all the way to Mexico and then drive to the US border, we can give them work visas. They don't even need employer sponsors. Let them buy houses. Let them make art, videos, businesses, software. Let them pay taxes into our system. That's step one. Step two is escalate everything else. The United States should drastically escalate its aid and arms to Ukraine. The US should take a maximalist approach, minus American troops, to accelerate the conclusion of this war. We should be sending Ukraine the long-range missile systems like ATACMS for their HIMARS. We should be sending them fourth and fifth generation fighters. We should be sending them unlimited Abram tanks and Bradleys. We should provide Ukraine with all the weapons they need to strike within Russia and to escalate this war. What is the point of stockpiling weapons if they are only to become obsolete in a decade as technology rapidly changes? I don't want to listen to the fear-mongering of weapons depletion paralyze my opinion into cowardice. In 1941, the United States simultaneously sent arms to Great Britain and the Soviet Union through the Lend-Lease program, while having her entire Pacific fleet obliterated by the Japanese, only to eventually win both wars on two different fronts. The United States has the industrial capacity to rapidly scale manufacturing if China were to invade Taiwan. That is not the issue. The issue is Ukraine needs weapons. The US has weapons. We should provide all those weapons to Ukraine now. We should be providing Ukraine with weapons with the aim to escalate this conflict as fast as possible to bring a resolution as soon as possible. Escalation should not scare us. The status quo should scare us. Because the status quo is gross. The West continuing to disgustingly breadcrumb material to Ukraine so that she can keep fighting Russia until Ukraine runs out of men and Russia's economy is exhausted 2, 3, 4 years from now, and some negotiated settlement is reached where this part remains Russian and all the rest is Ukraine. This is stupid and needlessly extends suffering. The longer the war goes on, the more men die in muddy trenches and dark ditches of Donbass. Stalin said 1 death is a tragedy. 1 million, that's a statistic. Are we Stalin? Every additional soldier that dies is a broken father and sister, a lost mother, and an unhinged younger brother. The United States has the ability to escalate the war to bring its conclusion quicker. The humane option is to do so. And you cannot force a resolution the opposite way. The United States withdraws its weapons and the war does not end. It just morphs into a bloody urban insurgency like Iraq and drags on forever. We should escalate the war to bring it to a conclusion sooner. Now, the other argument I hear quite frequently by fork-tongued pundits who wish to hedge their opinions so their cowardly voice can remain in business even after a million Slavs are dead is that Russia is a nuclear superpower. And what if this nuclear superpower escalates with nuclear weapons? What if nuclear weapons? What if nuclear weapons? They screech on Twitter and YouTube, which is exactly what Putin wants these puppet heads to screech. 1, Russia is not a nuclear-armed superpower. The United States can wage 2 wars simultaneously halfway around the world for 10 years without the public even really caring. Many of you may not even know what this image is, which proves my point. Russia can barely wage war 40 miles from her border without preventing her own mercenaries from gallivanting back into Russia's cities. Russia is not a superpower. Russia is a nuclear-armed nation, and nuclear-armed nations cannot be a reason to avoid escalation. The world can't operate from a place of fear. Fear breeds obsequity and sets a precedent of intimidation. The Ukrainians do not fear escalation, and they are the ones most likely to receive a tactical nuclear weapon dropped on them. If they are willing to assume the risk and continue to fight, who are we to deter them? But beyond our gross paternalistic approach to Ukraine, which is sick, if we fail to commit and to act because another nation has nuclear weapons, what does this encourage our enemies to do except go acquire nuclear weapons? Dictators from around the world are learning from our Pavlovian cowardice that all they must do is acquire a nuclear weapon, and then they are free to swing their small, shriveled dick on their neighboring countries with impunity, and the United States will do nothing because we fear escalation. I live in New York City. I don't want an ICBM dropped on me, but Russia is not going to escalate to nuclear weapons, as doing so would forfeit their existence in the human race. Nuclear weapons cannot be a reason to avoid escalation. And we intrinsically know this to be the case because we learn these morals as a child. If we have a gun and we walk upon a brute beating some yob with a baseball bat, we have a moral imperative to intervene and stop the violence. To stand down in fear this brute may escalate with his own gun while he beats this person to death is to be a coward. It's not strategic, it's an excuse not to act. There is a moral imperative for us to intervene and stop violence if we have the ability to do so. If the Russian brute escalates, then they escalate, and we escalate back. But we cannot fail to act. When the boy, bloody from getting beat in the face, asks why we didn't intervene, and we answer saccharinely, well, we didn't want to escalate in case he had a gun. Gun, he questions? I got beat in the face while you stood there. This is core to being an American, the moral imperative to act. The US should escalate to save Ukraine from grinding death. The US should escalate to save Russian conscripts from death. The US should escalate this war to enforce world order like 1991. The US should escalate to show small dick demagogues that nuclear weapons do not allow them to do what they want with impunity. The US should escalate to get Russians from Belarus to Tbilisi into the USA so that they can boost our economy and offer us a competitive edge over China. To quote Henry V, the game is already afoot. The US has squeezed Russia's gas supply, frozen her foreign bank assets, and provided tanks to Ukraine. There is no reverse card. The best option now is to escalate the war by welcoming Russians and aiding Ukrainians to accelerate the resolution of this war as fast as possible and move forward from a position of strength and not cowardice disguised as caution, as so many people paid to think publicly benefit from a long, drawn-out conflict. The gross monotony of death benefits no one except for the news and Lockheed Martin, who can feed their bottom line with endless fresh meat. No more pussyfooting around. We're already in. We should finish it. Don't let this be the Falcon-Steeler game that goes on another second half needlessly. And as I tell the mother of my child, this is turning into a Slavic civil war. This will go on forever if we don't end it.